powered from the Sereno Cigar Company studio in North Carolina. Welcome to Primetime Special Edition number 5. Tonight, we dedicate a full episode to cigar rights. We have the Executive Director of Cigar Rights of America, Glynn Loope, who will give us an update from the battlefront and discuss the cigars industry counterattack against the FDA. We'll dive deep into this one, primetime style. This episode of Special Edition is brought to you by Villiger Cigars. Since 1888, Villiger Cigars has been experts in everything tobacco, including offering a wide range of premium cigars for all connoisseurs. Try the new Sanduro line featuring the Sanduro Maduro, Sanduro Claro, and the Sanduro Colorado, rated in the top 25 cigars of the year by Cigar Aficionado for 2016. Visit their entire line of premium cigars at villigercigars.com. Welcome, everybody. It's Special Edition number 5. Will Cooper from the Sereno Cigar Company studios here in North Carolina. I'm joined by my co-host, Bear Duplessis in Texas. Bear, how's it going tonight?
Oh, it's going fantastic, Coop. Going fantastic. Really excited that we got Director Loope on tonight. It's gonna be a barn burner. Let's have some fun.
It's gonna be all good. Now, wait. We got to get the Bear. We got to put the camera on you for a second.
Okay.
Do we have?
Yeah. I don't
know if it's showing. Maybe.
Yeah. Can we get this a little zoomed in here? Come on, Director Loope. This was for you.
Oh my God! And I'm sitting here wearing a golf shirt.
I know.
Me too.
I saw you were in the polo.
I'm wearing my CRA one.
I'm sitting here sweating my ass off, and I'm in the Texas heat, and I was like, you know what? When he said we got Glynn Loope, I was like, oh, I'm rocking the bow tie.
He's been
I'm impressed.
He's had this one planned out for weeks. I wasn't gonna try it. Like, you two can get away with the bow tie. For me, I gotta wear the tuxedo.
It's really the facial hair, Coop. You need to join the club. You know. I
think so. But
I was just thinking about having to wear a bow tie in 111-degree temperatures in about a week.
Are you gonna? So you're gonna wear a bow tie out in Vegas?
See, yeah, I'm saving myself for that.
Okay, you're gearing up. Okay, I got it. Okay, much respect then. Much respect. There we go.
But you are in Texas, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So.
You know, they're not having the Davidoff dinner this year, which is the black tie, and I cover it every year. I know, Glynn, you've been there too, and it's a great event. The problem is, like, when you are not staying in the same hotel and you've got to go somewhere in that tuxedo, it is brutal. I mean.
Yeah, Vegas and formal wear don't quite go together all the time.
Not in July. That's sure. I mean, my goodness.
Well, is it ever? Let's be real here. I mean, is it ever not sweltering in Vegas? I mean, I think God invented the air conditioning just for that city alone. You know.
November during Big Smoke is actually fantastic. Yeah, I would recommend that.
Fantastic. You heard that, Coop. Glenn's gonna fly me out to Big Smoke in November.
Oh,
to enjoy the great weather. As thanks for wearing the bow tie today.
This is how rumors get started in Washington.
They have an ability of taking their life on their own, so to speak. Yeah. No. You know, Glynn. I was kind of just thinking. We haven't really had an on-air discussion in a long time, because I know when we got you on my old Stogie Geeks, I was in Cuba that week, so I didn't get a chance to talk with you. And then obviously I've restructured into the new show right now, so I'm really, really kind of glad to have you on, because I don't think we've kind of gotten into the fun of politics of cigars, and we'll try to make it fun. As fun this topic could be. I know it's not an easy topic, but I think it's an important topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time tonight, as you've taken the time on a lot of different mediums over the years, just really getting this message. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always important to spread the word anytime and any way that we can. And as you've noticed, it has been pretty vibrant here lately on the media front. Been radio shows based in Indianapolis and Colorado, and then our friends at Cigar Dojo. It's been a lot of print media type of activity. So it's been some mainstream media. You know, not that the Coop is not mainstream media. We know that it's really close. That's a joke.
Well, it's actually not, but it's actually really good. I'm hearing that. That's, I think, been something that I think, as an industry have struggled with. And this is not a CRA.
Well, hold that thought. I'm gonna get something to keep talking. I'm gonna get something to show you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's Bear. I think it's important that that our message, and I think we talked about on our previous show how our message basically needs to be on the main medias, like the newspapers, Fox. Hopefully they won't screw it up. but
I didn't hear a damn word you said, but no.
I was just
Since I know
filling
you,
airtime.
Yeah, I
since
mean,
you're
I
talking
agree.
about-
Before Glynn pulls
Go
out
ahead.
that document for us, yeah, I think that one of the things that you and I even talked about before this particular episode was just actually the lack of education and the lack of understanding of what the issue actually is. I think that the general public, and frankly, a lot of cigar smokers, feel that we're wanting to turn everyone into a cigar smoker, and that's not that's not even close. That's not even in the same galaxy as what we're trying to accomplish and the rights that we're trying to protect. And Glenn, you've got something for us, so I want to see it.
Yeah.
No, along the lines of what you just said, Bear, is I think this is how we closed the discussion with Eric and the guys at Cigar Dojo last time. It is not about converting or encouraging cigar smoking. It's a passion. It's a hobby, and it's an acquired taste. But where we did leave that program off, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, it's been a lot since then. But if it's not cigars today, it's cheeseburgers and Diet Cokes tomorrow.
Yep.
It's red meat. It's caffeine. There's no doubt they're going to be coming after caffeine. So pick a passion. Where we left off before I pulled my ears out with Will is when you were talking about mainstream media and mainstream media getting it, we put together this media book. And this media book, we use it with members of Congress, and we use it with educational types of initiatives. But this is all totally posted on our main homepage at cigarrights.org now. The purpose of this, and it kind of highlights, that we all know that the Coop and the like are mainstream cigar media, but the ultra mainstream media, shall we say, has really been running a lot of positive stories for our side of the debate since the final rule came out on May the 10th of 16. So this collection, I think it's like 14 different articles. Washington Times, the Miami Herald, Tampa Bay Times, several times the Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, the Orlando paper, the Robb Report, the Washington Post, and then a collection of mainstream online sites with headlines like FDA's proposed rule would snuff out small manufacturers of premium cigars. Could Miami cigar industry go up in smoke? These are mainstream media types of stories. New rules could leave cigar industry in ashes. Wall Street Journal, give that man a break. No, I'm sorry, give that man a cigar, but quick, before the regulations kick in. I highlight that because these are mainstream media stories about the rule that are demonstrating, like you said, Bear, that it's about a bigger, grander type of an issue than quote unquote, eradicating the world from tobacco the way some at the FDA want to do. So I hope that kind of demonstrates that. It's pretty cool. Anybody wants to read those stories, this exact cover is on the front page of our home site at cigarrights.org. If anybody wants to peruse a lot, I think it's 14 to 17 stories. Washington Examiner, the FDA is coming for your premium cigars. This is not, Cigar Press, Cigar Aficionado, Cigar Snob, any of the podcasts and the like. This is professional journalists, if you will, writing about our story. And I think that's a very positive trend in this entire debate. I wish it had happened much sooner.
Glenn,
I think, yeah, go ahead, Coop. I was just going to, go ahead. I'll have it in a second.
So, I think this was it's an important step to take. Now, a few months ago, the Washington Post, when the delay came, the 90-day delay came, I don't know if you remember, there was kind of a misleading headline.
It was.
So, yeah. Now, do you think here's what I think. Do you think that was a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, the Post was obviously going for a little bit of a slant that was anti our position, but
yeah, But
Didn't I read that they did print a retraction the next day
they,
or something?
they changed it. They didn't print the retraction, but they did change it.
I also loved how they didn't get anyone from our side of the argument either. That was fantastic. No quote.
That was my next thing, Glenn. I mean, so one thing in
Well,
there. Go ahead, Glenn. I'll let you
no,
answer that.
no. Get your question out.
So one thing is that in that article is I noticed there was someone from, of course, Tobacco Free Kids, right? Because they're going to get in there because it's anti-tobacco. Then there was a quote from the vaping community, but I didn't see a quote from the cigar community. But what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing what you just showed is a good foundation and steps to take. Are these things that now maybe we could start as an industry, start getting the cigar people making the quotes in these types of publications?
Well, I think it depends on the forum. It depends on who's doing the writing. I mean, you're not going to know in advance when the Washington Post is going to come out with a story, good, bad, or indifferent. You're not going to know until they call you. The mainstream media has been pretty diligently. We're quoted in some of the stories on this in this booklet that we've posted in the Post, in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, and a number of other. The Miami and Tampa papers have been fabulous about contacting somebody from the premium cigar industry for their stories. So I think it's a matter of time. You know, I'm having when we have this discussion, I'm having a flashback because nobody summed it up better, and I can tell you the day he did it is Ernesto Carrello, and it was well before the FDA was even thinking about issuing a final rule on cigars. We were at the first ever industry-wide meeting in Miami the CRE ever had. It was April the 9th, 2009, and Ernesto said, you know, maybe instead of hiring a bunch of lobbyists, we ought to hire some public relations people.
Absolutely.
And he was dead on, absolutely correct. It plays back to when, you know, if you really think about it in this academic context, and especially if we read the book Velvet Glove, Iron Fist on a history of the anti-smoking movement, if this industry had started to play that game with economics, meaning hiring economists to paint the picture of what they are versus the rest of the tobacco universe, and public relations types of campaigns, and really doing a better job than has been or could be expected of differentiating premium handmade cigars from other tobacco products or from any other vice, if you will. It might be a different political ball game today. But as I'm fond of saying, we're not going to be the first industry, and we're not going to be the last that calls its way back from political Armageddon. And I think we're on the road to doing that collectively as an industry.
Glenn, you mentioned before we get straight too far away from the subject, you mentioned that you know, look, we've mentioned some great publications. The Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post certainly jump up to mind outside of the state of Florida, as far as those legitimate publications and those legitimate mainstream media covering our movement. But with that, you said to yourself that, you know, we're not going to get a call. No one's going to get a call until there's a story to get placed. What kind of things can the CRA do? What kind of things can Coop and I do? What kind of things can you know, the local tobacconist, the consumer do to be the person in the forefront of the mind when these kinds of stories are getting written or they're about to be published? Because I certainly have a voice and opinion about it. Now, I co-host a special edition show with Coop here, so I mean, certainly the Washington Post isn't going to call me, but at the same time, I think it's a pretty valid question. Why isn't the premium cigar industry not on the forefront of these of their minds when they're looking to publish these stories?
It's a great question. And when you were asking it, I was also pondering, we do initiate stories. And I'll give you an example of, we did some encouragement of the stories that ran about the New England Journal of Medicine story that clearly substantiated that America's youth are not gravitating to premium handmade cigars. And we also knew that, you know, working with publications like Cigar Aficionado and the like, that if they run it, there's a good chance of it getting picked up by the wire services. I think what you're doing and becoming a preeminent podcast, I think, you know, podcasts like yours and what Dave Garofalo does and what Cigar Dave does, any of those things that help bring additional attention to this industry in the positive context that you do, has a good chance of getting picked up by the outside media. I think we also have a good chance of planting more stories where I started this discussion, especially with, I'm going to say, right of center publications. It doesn't mean they're any less objective, and it doesn't mean they're any less mainstream, but there are some media outlets that are clearly more sympathetic to our message than others. I think some of the editorials that have run in the Washington Times over the last 3 years have clearly been some of the best stuff written about our plight and why the federal bureaucracy has gone too far. I think those are just a few examples. The Wall Street Journal's been the same way.
Glenn, I'll give you a couple of here was a good example I thought of media, and here was a kind of one I thought that could have been improved. The good one was last week when we'll get into the Gottlieb testimony in a little bit, but you guys got the Gottlieb testimony out to people like instantly, like that night. I mean, we all saw it, we all got the video, and that message got out quickly. But that was a big, I thought, applaud. Now, sometimes what I've seen is, and there may be reasons for this, like when Joe Manchin was meeting in Tampa, I think me wanted to hear something, I guess, on that end, even if it was just an acknowledgement that Joe Manchin understood the problems. And that one didn't seem to get as publicized.
Well, there was a reason for that. It was a private fundraiser.
Okay, so there was a reason for that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it wasn't some open forum, if you will.
Okay.
It was a private event for the senator at the Newman factory.
Okay, so because then I was looking back they did a great job with the Marco Rubio visit where it was streamed.
That was a campaign event. It was a campaign event,
but it still worked in our favor because
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's you didn't hear anything about the Senator Bill Nelson event 2 weeks before the Senator Manchin event, also at the Newman factory. It was a private fundraiser.
Okay.
So there's a question of strategy with some of those types of things.
Oh, understood. That clears up. That does clear it up for me.
And the Rubio event was fair game for the media and everybody else because they were there covering his reelection to the Senate. That was
a great thing because the media was in there, and I guarantee you, I watched it on video, and I saw body language with the media. Like they were totally clueless a lot of what was going on there.
Absolutely. It's taken a while, but the Tampa and Miami media markets have clearly woken up and been very supportive of the cause in terms of the stories that they've written. And several of them are front and center on that publication piece we noted.
So and I'm glad we hit this media topic first. It was something I wanted to hit. So, and these things obviously take money. It's not, bringing PR. Is there a roadmap now where we're going to look at possibly getting some PR people and going forward, or is this just, again, it's a money?
Sure. After we finish paying legal fees, we'll. No, the short answer to that is no.
Okay.
I'd be painfully honest about that. I mean, no. And we've interviewed and sat down with some PR firms that have been referred by our law firms, plural, in Washington. We've sat down with them to talk hypothetical strategies. But man, it's an uphill climb raising the money in this industry to pay the legal fees and the lobbying expectations and the like. And it's very serious. And this industry is not used to these types of price tags. Should it be a part of a much more long-term strategy for the good of this industry? Absolutely. But we've got some very immediate fish to fry, if you will, including close to a 7-digit lawsuit right now.
Absolutely. So, and that's a good segue. So let's kind of get into the FDA piece. And, I was actually, when I was prepping for this show, I kind of looked at this and I said, you know what? This is a battle that's being waged with all three branches of government right now. I mean, you got legislative, you got judicial.
It is.
And I think they're all, when I started breaking them down, I thought there was some very interesting things. Since we're on the lawsuit, maybe we just start off where are we right now with the lawsuit right now?
Well, let's go back to your question. I mean, your note about it being all three branches of government. I think I've closed a lot of mainstream media quotes with the statement, this battle is now literally being fought on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. And right in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue, between the White House and the Capitol, is U.S. District Court. So it's literally both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue and a courthouse right in the middle. and so those battle lines are clearly drawn up and down exactly one street in Washington D.C. Where
But
are
I
we?
want to just interrupt you for 1 second. We have our biggest live audience right now since I've started the show. So I want to, it's very important. We have a lot of people tuning in. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad it's working. I'm
Yeah,
glad we're
so
having this conversation.
that's good. Yep.
Well, one, and I did this with the dojo. This is a copy of the lawsuit. This is 240 pages of the litigation that was filed July the 15th, I do believe.
Certainly a more provocative read than the deeming regulations, right?
Well, yeah, Bear. There's the final rule.
There you go, right?
There's the final rule. That's the 499 pages of the final rule. And again, here's the lawsuit that was filed, and clearly the points that have been made have been talked about at great length, and it brings up the most harsh pieces of the rule and why that the FDA was wrong in its approach. I don't want to say but so much because of it being active litigation, but I will give you a snapshot of where we are in the process. One, obviously, since May the 10th, issuance of the final rule, and then there was the filing of the suit in July of 16, just before the trade show, the Friday, I believe, before the trade show last year. And then there was this little event that took place since then called the election. And no matter where you stand on the partisan divide, and believe me, I know how divisive this election was, how divisive that election was to this day. So a lot of the things I say, I want to make sure they're not taken in a partisan context. I had this discussion at the Big Smoke in Vegas where I was talking about the administration, and someone thought I was just touting pro-Trump type of theme. And I made sure that I said at the end of this, it's about dealing with political reality. And so I want to couch my statements with this notion, I'm dealing with political reality. And political reality is Trump won. And what does that mean to the premium cigar industry? If Clinton had won, we'd be talking about it in an entirely different context. So I want to make sure that your listeners and viewers know that what I'm saying and how I'm saying it is not, anything more than political reality.
Right.
That being said, that's my disclaimer. I hope I got it through, but that's my disclaimer.
That's fair. That's fair.
Is that we are having conversations that we would not have had otherwise. And we are having conversations with the administration that we would not have had otherwise if with or without the litigation. Now, the litigation, though, has sparked a number of discussions and negotiations that we clearly would not have had otherwise as well. That being said, let's go back to just post-election. Immediately, and I mean immediately after the election and after the Trump transition was set up in New York City, the Cigar Association of America, excuse me, and this is water, by the way. After the transition was set up, the Cigar Association of America, the IPCPR, and CRA came together for a joint position paper letter to the administration's transition team about the regulation. So within, I guess, 7 to 10 days of the election and 7 to 10 days of the transition office being open, that joint letter under all three banners was delivered to the transition. Secondly, some key members of Congress did immediate outreach to the vice president. Then shortly after that, Congress came into session, and Congressman Bill Posey and Congresswoman Kathy Castor, our original co-sponsors for the Republicans and Democrats, issued a joint letter to members of Congress explaining the rule, explaining the adverse economic impact of the rule, the flaws of the FDA, and the like. And all that's said in a political context. This was political messaging immediately to the administration. Then the administration started to take shape. And after Congressman Tom Price was named Secretary of Health and Human Services, given his history with our legislation, that opened up a door for messaging to his office as well. So there was immediate communication between allies of his in Congress, friends of his in Congress, allies of ours in Congress, to Secretary Price. Then, lo and behold, since I have no idea when our last conversation was, Will,
it was prior to May 5th of last year.
Well, then this is not. This is good to kind of do a rehash of this.
Right.
Then Congressman Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina was appointed director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, through which all regulations have to go.
Yep.
So he was a past co-sponsor of ours, so there was an opportunity for messaging.
He's a local guy from me. Yep.
To him. So you had the Vice President of the United States, who was a former co-sponsor. You had Secretary Tom Price, a former co-sponsor, and Mick Mulvaney. I just wrote a piece that was published in Tobacco Business Magazine probably a month ago, maybe two, where I spoke about the virtue of a legislative record. There are some people within this industry, there are people that are close to this industry that have clearly questioned the virtue of our political and legislative effort. Ladies and gentlemen, I could not be more firm in saying the virtue of having a 5-year legislative record in the United States Congress on exemption legislation came screaming through with that election because of the appointments that took place. Again, political reality, not partisan, is that record gave us a notion of exactly where our strategy could go, hypothetically could go with this administration, knowing that we had opportunities for messaging to the Vice President, the Secretary of Health, and the White House Office of Management and Budget Director. You know, if anything proves the virtue of allocating the resources that we have collectively between IPCPR and CRA towards lobbying Congress, it is a moment in political history like that. And that is what every special interest group does in Washington, D.C. You roll with the punches, you find out where your friends and enemies are, and you build your strategy around that. So the virtue of that 5-year legislative record, I believe, came screaming through at that very moment with those additional appointments to the administration. So let's flash forward. Let's go backwards a little bit to your opening of the litigation. I know we're jumping around. We will be jumping around.
They're all intertwined. Yeah.
They are intertwined.
Yeah. Yep.
So the lawsuits filed jointly between CAA, IPCPR, and CRA. The 240 pages was filed in D.C. Circuit Court. We came up with all the flaws. The legal team came up with all the flaws in the final rule and the approach to the rule, and the greatest fallacy of which was that there was no proper economic impact analysis done on this rule before it was issued. A clear violation of the regulatory process. No one could put their finger on the true economic cost, but yet they call it a rule of significance, a rule of economic significance, and that means it has greater than a $100 million economic impact on this country. And that's the other reason that we've been highlighting the economic impact in specific pockets of this country to build political support, i.e. Connecticut with farmers, and Pennsylvania with the farming community and distribution community, with the state of Florida from the port of Miami through the corporate headquarters that span 95 between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and then north over to Tampa and Naples, highlighting what it means for Nevada as we're getting ready to go to Las Vegas as an industry, what it means economically to that community, what it meant when the trade show was in Orlando and New Orleans. None of these factors were taken into consideration when that final rule was developed, much less what it means internationally. And there are serious international implications to this. My words exactly have been, the FDA declared a trade war on Latin America with this rule. And I feel very strongly about that statement. When you've got that many tens of thousands of jobs associated with supporting families and children and 2 wage earner families in Honduras and Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic, and then you throw in the places that we draw leaf from foreign industry, from Ecuador, Brazil, Mexico, Costa Rica, and others. The FDA was, in fact, flip, and I don't use that term loosely, in how they treated the international economic implications of this regulation. Then we've got, the warning label, ridiculous notion of the warning label covering 30% of the packaging. So all these things, the economic impact, the flawed approach of the rule in the first place, the warning label, and then we get into the substantial equivalence questions, the pre-market approval questions, and the fact that they treated this industry worse than they even treated the cigarette industry and other tobacco products in the final rule is an absolute atrocious commentary on rulemaking across the board within the federal bureaucracy. So all that's pointed out in that 240 pages. In comes the Trump Justice Department with Attorney General Sessions. I say this in a political context. The last thing I think this administration as a whole wants to do is to go to court to defend a regulation of any type. If you look what's happened with financial services and with the energy sector, and I think you've got to look at these things in a more macro context to see where we fit in. I think it clearly demonstrates that, we've got an administration, again, not a partisan statement, that is pro-business, that is looking for ways to invigorate this nation's economy, that makes trade a focal point of its economic strategy. And here we have a rule that is not going to slap around a China or a Germany, but slap around the economies of third world countries that can least afford it. So I think all that comes screaming through in our lawsuit. It's going to be up to the FDA to decide about defending it and the Justice Department. But I think we've opened some doors through this litigation. And I say I mean all three collective trade associations have opened new doors to get the point across, as we never could have before, as to the flawed nature of this rule. And our position has been firm and consistent. We're about exemption, and we're about the message of exemption, and we're about mitigating the harm that this rule can do to this industry, no matter how big or small your company may be. It's about protecting all facets of this industry. And I said this on the dojo. This lawsuit works to protect every sector of this industry. No matter how big or small your company is, this lawsuit works to protect all sizes and shapes of this industry. And I think that's an important point to get across. So without that rambling, I'll see if you guys can pick up on any questions.
No,
Glynn, I've got a question for you, just to take it back. And I didn't want to interrupt you because
I was on a ramble.
Yeah, you're rolling. So, but you had mentioned that our industry has had conversations with the office of the president and the vice president, and now the director of the Office of Business Management, if I'm not correct. So, like, when we say conversations, are we talking like representatives such as yourself are in a room with the president, with his representative?
No.
What can you tell me a little bit more about that?
No, we have not spoken to the president personally. We have had emissaries of this industry work to convey the message of this industry and what it means and why
With the
this
president?
rule. Let's just say with the office of the president. Let's just put it that way. And we've conveyed direct communications to the vice president and to the Secretary Price and to Director Mulvaney. And there's been some very, very direct discussions with the secretary and with the director and with their respective staff. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about what our attorneys have been doing to advance the work of the lawsuit, but there have been at least two very, very direct, tangible discussions with the Justice Department. And I think their eyes and ears are open, and I think they're getting the message as to why this rule needs to change.
Have we gotten any direct responses from any of these offices, whether it be as high as the president or Director Mulvaney or Secretary Price?
None that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Fair enough. So, Glynn, one thing that happened with the lawsuit with the new administration, again, these things tying together, is there was the delay. So that
came as a result of our lawyers' first round of discussions with the Justice Department, and representatives of the Secretary of Health's office were in that meeting as well.
Now, I thought a delay was extremely valuable to us. I thought that was something. Anytime you could slow down a regulatory process, I thought that was a good thing. I mean, some people disagreed with me on that. I was surprised.
Who would disagree with you on that?
I heard some feedback saying it doesn't do anything much more.
Well, that would be wrong.
Yeah.
That delay opened the door to discussions about a more long-term delay to reevaluate the fallacy of the rule.
And here's the thing. So, Glynn, maybe you can explain this part. not all the regulations have been, I guess the guidance hasn't been issued yet for the regulations. So with this 90-day delay, does that literally slow down the FDA from coming up with this minutia that's going to make up the, I'm being biased here, but makes up the guidance? Is that,
Listen,
yeah,
I don't trust anything right now. Meaning what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, I know we're going to get into this, but you've got a new FDA commissioner who's in charge, and that's all come about since the development of the final rule, the development of the litigation, the filing of the litigation. You know, I don't know if you want to get into Director Gottlieb right now, but I mean Commissioner Gottlieb right now, but let's go back to your premise about what's going on.
right.
I don't trust the environment of any bureaucracy not to be working to advance their own agenda in preparation for whatever may happen. I think they have plan A's and plan B's and plan C's. I think that's the nature of a bureaucracy that has a agenda. And I'm not going to call it a political agenda because I wouldn't want to equate it to the president's agenda. But I think there's a philosophical agenda that's blatantly anti-tobacco, that's blatantly anti-deemed products, whether you're talking about e-cigarettes, hookah, pipe tobacco, or cigars that were brought under this rule. I think you've got this agenda still lurking in the background that has to be addressed in a political context, which is why we consistently do the messaging we do with Congress and have members of Congress message for us because they're more powerful than we are to convey our messages to the fallacy of this rule to the proper officials, whether it be the Vice President, the President, the Secretary of Health, Director Mulvaney, whoever the case might be. And right now, there's been a tremendous amount of messaging taking place to the Commissioner of the FDA. And I'm very candid and public about that. And that's part of this lobbying campaign. It's not just about this legislation. And I want to emphasize that to anybody that's listening. It's not just about the legislation. The legislation gives us a platform to take our message to the administration. And so with that, we've got clear allies in Congress that have been developed over the course of the last 5 years that are proving to be invaluable at sending that message for us to this administration. That's a part of the lobbying just as much as trying to pass a piece of legislation. So I don't want there to be any confusion or ambiguity about that part of the strategy.
You brought up something that was on my mind, though. So, and I think I know what your answer is going to be. So I look at the lawsuit, and there is a plaintiff and a defendant, right? So the defendant is the FDA. The FDA commissioner's name's on that.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, it's going to be Dr. Gottlieb. And I know that there has been I look at it at the glass half full. Yes, this was a better choice for an FDA commissioner than what we had in the past or could have got. I get that. But I still think he's the guy on the other end of that lawsuit. So are you saying basically we are looking at this carefully here? Because, again, he's the guy still who's going to be on the other end of that court case.
If the Justice Department wants to take it that far. And that's all I'll say about that.
Interesting. What? So what you're saying is the Justice Department, obviously, the Justice Department could actually wipe this. There's a chance that they can look at this and say, we're not going forward with this.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay. Fair enough. That's interesting, though.
So, Glenn, you mentioned that we've developed some really strong relationships with Congress, congressmen and women, and I think that goes without saying with the support that our bills have gotten in the past. I did want to ask, it's probably just because it's early in this new Congress and everything, but back in 2011, I believe, with a couple of the bills that we had on the floor. We had a working majority in Congress that was either a co-sponsor or in favor of it.
It's true.
And then, according to my numbers right now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we've got. Excuse me, I just want to make sure that I've got it here. 99 Republicans and 18 Democrats in favor of that have sponsored House Bill 564. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Out of 435 congressmen. Okay.
Yeah.
where are we as far as getting those numbers further up the ladder? Because by my count, and I'm going to stick my head on the chopping block here because he is my representative. In the past, Congressman Kenny Marchant was a co-sponsor, in fact, of one of our bills and has been an advocate for the small business aspect, at least, of our argument. And his name is noticeably absent from House Bill 564. As well as others, including another congressman just down the street from me, Joe Barton. So my question is, if they were in support then, is there a reason they're absent now? Or
with some there is. I'm not specifically familiar with why your member may or may not have signed back on, but I do know the reasons for some others that may have not signed on or signed on yet. I know that, let's just break this part down in somewhat of a partisan context, and also as an example and somewhat of a metaphor. Some Democrats that were on didn't sign back on because they got beat up by the healthcare community. And some Republicans didn't sign back on because they got beat up on by big tobacco. That is still against our legislation. So I'm not saying that that's specific to your member or any collection of members, but I do know that that philosophical divide has come into play. And some of them simply haven't gotten around to it yet. Sometimes, I mean, the attention span for staff and the like sometimes in Washington can be just mind-boggling. And sometimes you think every single member must be working on something that pertains to national security, but the budget, which is clearly not the case. But they all have their different reasons, and some of them it's attention to the issue as a whole, and some of them it's more philosophically grounded. Does that answer your question?
I mean, it does to a very specific sense. I'm just curious. I'm curious to see if you could comment on the strategy that the industry is taking as far as reacquiring members who have supported the legislation in the past, and also recruiting any future allies as well.
Sure. It's shoe leather politics, and we've got lobbying teams from IPCPR and CRA that are on the Hill virtually every day. They're in session. I've got in front of me on my desk here. I've got a copy of the congressional calendar that's for the entire year, and there's a lot of white spaces, and the white spaces mean they're not even in session, and that means they're not around, which is the importance of retailers and consumers reaching out to members while they're in their district on this issue just as much as we are when they're in Washington. But they're wrapping up now, business for this week come Friday, then going into the July 4th recess. Then there's a lot of debate on whether or not they're going to be kept over into August, which some think they ought to be, or the president maybe think they ought to be, to tackle the healthcare issue. But, the legislation was refiled within the first 2 weeks of January. And since that time, there's literally been about 12, 13 weeks of legislative timing. So right now we're probably par for the course. We came out of the chute very strong with a lot of original co-sponsors, a bigger class, if you will, of co-sponsors on the front end of the bill than we ever had in the previous 3 sessions of Congress. So it's a matter of time. And so if your member hasn't been gotten to yet, that's one question, or if they may have their own rationale for not having signed back on. But it's on an office by office basis. And
just I wanted to also see if there was anything that you could comment on, or any kind of strategies that you might reveal. Now, obviously, historically speaking, our legislation and our history is gained and garnered more support from the right versus the left. And I mean, I don't necessarily want you to go into a whole diatribe about that necessarily, but what are some of the active strategies as far as recruitment for perhaps evening up that tally a little bit?
Well, it's about where we also have concentrations of grassroots outreach. I mean, you're in Texas, and Texas is a strong state for the legislation as a whole. Not so much in the Senate, obviously, and I just had that discussion at 9 o'clock this morning about Senator Cornyn. There's no reason, in my opinion, in the world for Senator Cornyn not to be on this bill. And frankly, we need Senator Pat Toomey to sign back on from Pennsylvania. And it's a matter of strategy, and it's a matter of timing, and it's a matter of political agendas to try to accomplish those types of things. Senator Cornyn your guess is as good as mine. But you take that analogy on a member by member basis. Frankly, right now we ought to be talking about 150 co-sponsors. But one very powerful member of the Senate said to me last session, Glynn, it's not how many you've got, it's who you've got. And we've got some key members in both chambers on our side on this. So I'm going to subscribe now to the philosophy of it's not how many, but who. And there are some that we definitively need and want. But the fact that, we got a Democrat and Republican and Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio, both from the state of Florida, where the foundation of this industry lies, on our side. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who's got about 4 premium cigar shops in his state, but his standing in the Senate has been absolutely incredibly helpful to this entire effort. Senator Casey of Pennsylvania has been a great voice on the Democratic side for our legislation for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And you turn around and we've got, just last week, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas came on board, who's a real rising star in the chamber. And it's about messaging to these members of the appropriations and finance committees. And I think we're going to have some good news out of the House of Representatives pretty soon. So
Mike,
it's a lot of moving parts.
Absolutely. And just to follow up on this, is there any strategy in place currently that would go to garner support from people who are actively campaigning? Someone that comes to mind clearly in my area is Beto O'Rourke, a Democrat out of my hometown, El Paso, Texas, who's battling Ted Cruz for his upcoming spot that's up for election in the Senate. Are we, as an industry, fighting the battle with who is in place now, or is there any table setting, if you will, with potential members of the Senate or Congress that could be taking office sooner than later?
Well, the 18th cycle in political terms is a long ways away. It's something that's always in the back of your mind. Had a discussion this morning about one particular Senate seat where that may be a discussion to take place. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, we have to concentrate on what's in front of us right now.
That's what I thought. So.
And dealing with the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate, we got to deal with political reality. That doesn't mean you take your eye off the ball of what could happen. I mean, one of my dear political mentors in the Virginia legislature used to tell me, Glynn, it's not about how to get from A to C. It's about the ramifications on E, F, and G. And you've got to think about politics in that proverbial term of it's chess, not checkers. But put the metaphors aside, we've got to deal with some very quick political reality. We've got to deal with the fact there's a very limited number of legislating days left in this entire calendar year. We've got to talk about this in the context of what can be accomplished with this administration as quickly as humanly possible to mitigate the damage of this rule. We were just having a communication exchange tonight. Andrew Wood, and now we're going back and forth on this SE guidance and what it could mean to the boutique side of the industry. It's a frightening proposition, and I'm still awaiting some of the details on it. But when you're talking about, diving into the substantial equivalence question, and the FDA putting out subjective lingo that could really mess things up for a lot of companies, no matter how sophisticated or not they may be. I call this, well, a lot of people have called this, it's regulation by experience. And it's ridiculous that we're dealing with regulation by experience. And this is quintessential FDA Center for Tobacco Products. I call it Velcro politics. Let's throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And that's what they did in the final rule. Let's throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And that's a very poor commentary on the rulemaking process, which is why we're supporting the Regulatory Accountability Act, which could really reform how any agency goes about regulating anything in the future. Congress has got a strong appetite for that. It's a bill that's already gotten through the House of Representatives, and it's got strong bipartisan support in the Senate, and it's a bill that this president, I think, would sign, and it would solve a lot of problems in the future. But right now, we're dealing with the reality of a bureaucracy run amok with the rulemaking process, and hopefully Commissioner Gottlieb can start to reform that sooner rather than later.
Glenn, a quick question, and it's a little off, but is Mitch Zeller still in the picture?
Definitively.
Okay, so he stands to still be there, but he's got a new boss now.
He does.
Okay, so we don't know anything about that relationship, right? It would seem like on the surface they are different, and they have different opinions.
I'm not going to comment one way or the other.
Understood.
I think that the commentaries that have come out have been very telling, shall we say, and I think Commissioner Gottlieb has been very consistent. Back in May, I think it was May 25th, Dr. Gottlieb appeared before a House committee, and Congressman Kevin Yoder of Kansas, who's a great supporter of our cause, brought up specifically the premium cigar question to Commissioner Gottlieb. And he said, we're going to go where the science leads us. And he was not going to pass judgment on these things before that type of evaluation had been conducted. During his confirmation hearing, Senator Patty Murray of Washington really pressed him on the question of e-cigarettes specifically and on flavored cigars. And he, to his credit, said, I'm not passing judgment on that right now. And I admired his fortitude for the way he stood up in that committee hearing and stated that. And then, of course, the exchange, you could almost overlay the exchange that the commissioner had with Congressman Yoder with the exchange he had with Senator Rubio last week. It was almost identical, which is a testimony to his consistency. And he says, listen, we've got to evaluate where we are in this process. We need to find out where we are in terms of mitigating the harm to small business. And he absolutely said that. He said we need to figure out ways to mitigate harm to small business. And obviously that's a tremendous amount of the premium cigar industry. And he says we're going to go where the science leads us. And we think that those battle lines cut our way as well. So we look forward to making our case to him as the new commissioner. And then he has to make some judgment calls as to how his agencies respond to that.
I don't necessarily want you to divulge any pertinent strategy or anything here, Glenn, with my question, but with the fact that he has stated so emphatically, consistently, with the fact that he wants to go where the science leads him, and while it wasn't his FDA, but it was the FDA dollars that sponsored that report that Cigar Aficionado reported on, as far as the fact that premium cigars, and actually non-premium cigars as well, are not a threat to the underage smoker. To me, that's clear as that's not one of those situations where it's clear as mud. That's clear as day that the science is telling him that premium cigars are not a threat to the underage smoker, or nor the health or welfare of the underage smoking community.
Well, I appreciate your point, but surveys are not science. And even though it's very positive that a survey of that nature came out in of all publications, the New England Journal of Medicine, we still have the health science side of this equation to deal with, and we still feel positive about that. Basically it's called the continuum of risk, and we are way down here compared to other tobacco products, and that's an acknowledged scientific fact. But on the debate on public health, we submitted some very solid, very strong components to our public comment to the original issuance of the deeming rule on the question of inhalation and addiction and mortality rates and those types of questions. And that's where the sciences ought to cut our way in terms of the public health debate. So whereas the New England Journal of Medicine piece was very positive, because a cornerstone of the passage of the Tobacco Control Act was youth access to tobacco, that cuts our way. But we've got a public health question to deal with, just in the same way that we have a demographic question to deal with.
Now, you may have just answered the question that I have for you, Glenn, here, but my follow-up to that would be, is this why? Coop and I discussed this on a previous episode, and he had this opinion. So, Coop, I'm kind of stealing your thunder here, and I apologize. Okay. But Coop had this opinion that why we were just hearing about this was something that was released back in January. The press got a hold of it and released it in April. Now, we obviously know why the FDA sat on it. But is that the answer to the question that it wasn't science-based and it was more survey on why the premium cigar industry?
No, I mean, your point is very, very well taken about the exposure, the analysis, and let's call it analysis received. And that's one of the reasons that it was great that Cigar Aficionado did the release that they did, bringing additional attention to the review. And that survey was incredibly significant, not just because they surveyed a very large pool of youth about their tobacco use habits or practices, if you will. It was beneficial in that the parents had to verify the answer. That is so cool that the parents had to verify the answers of the youth that I think were predominantly between the ages of 12 and 17, I believe. And it just lent an air of credibility to our entire debate that America's youth are not using and enjoying premium handmade cigars. They're not. And if you look at the compliance statistics that the FDA puts out themselves, it is clear that this product is not attractive to that demographic. That analysis substantiated that. Let's go back to the premise of your statement, though, and that is the exposure that it got. Well, if the statistics don't cut your way, are you going to put out a press release?
Of course, that's why I said I know why the FDA sat on it. So.
Right. But I guess my thing is, did we know about it back in January and we just kind of sat on it, or did we kind of wait for a timing to do it? It seemed like the timing was interesting with that because it was April and some of the players were now, getting into place here.
Let's put it this way. It added an extra air of support to the litigation, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I was telling Coop it was almost like a trump card, if you would, because I
really did, because that's a big piece of the legislation. This is children, yeah.
Well, after the study came out, and then after the administration got to, started to be put into place, there was an immediate effort to provide an executive summary of that analysis to every key congressional office that's in our corner and to the Secretary of Health's office.
Did Secretary Price have a comment on the study? I didn't see anything published or anything. Are we aware of anything?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
Interesting. That still is interesting though. Will Cooper, Bear the Pussy. This is Primetime Special Edition number 5. We're talking cigar rights with Glynn Loope here. Glynn, again, thanks so much for making the time here. This is some really, really good information we've gotten tonight. So we do appreciate it, and the honesty and candor as far as that goes. We were talking more about Dr. Gottlieb and Secretary Price. What is it exactly? If there is some sort of a decision to be made by these guys, right, that could positively affect us, what are some things that they can't undo the laws, right? From what I understand.
No, there's a process to undoing regulation.
Okay, but it's
not somebody can wave the magic wand and say poof, it's gone. There's a definitive process, and it could be a matter of reopening the rule for consideration based upon the flaws within the rulemaking process. But the administration has a lot of options at its disposal to reevaluate the approach to implementing the rule.
So is that something they could basically say, hey, we're going to go back and reissue all this guidance again? Is that something that they can do?
It's not. It's more complicated than that, but yeah, there's options for reevaluating the rule. And I mean, they're the ones that put out option 2 for exemption.
Right.
And we endorsed their definition of premium cigar, except for the price quantifier of $10 to qualify as a premium cigar. That's absolute lunacy.
Right.
But politics is a game of give and take, and the rulemaking process is not exactly a give and take, but at least now there is an audience willing to listen to our industry's concerns.
Right. So an ideal.
Go ahead.
So an ideal thing is they can come. Like one thing is it's a possibility they can. Again, this is hypothetical. They could hypothetically say, "Hey, look, we will reconsider option 2. Not saying they're doing that, but that's something that they have the authority to do if they wanted to. Well, we can go back and look at
We're
option 2.
encouraging them to do that.
Okay.
We're encouraging them to do exactly that, to go down the path of an option 2 exemption.
How about if, let's say, they don't go option 2? Do they have the authority to basically say, okay, some of these fees that are being charged, that some of these crippling, could some of those things be mitigated under their power?
Well, a part of the lawsuit is that the FDA chose not to impose user fees on the e-cigarette industry. And Congress clearly said, if you're regulated, you're paying the user fees. And that's a piece of our several points of the lawsuit. So addressing the user fee question as a whole, it's significant and it's expensive for these companies, especially those that are making a lot of cigars. But it's more the economic impact of the testing and SE process that should be fearful for the industry, as opposed to just the user fees to the bureaucracy for the honor and pleasure of being regulated. We brought this up with the governor's office in the last, well, it's been for some time, but we've really picked up a lot of extra communication effort, if you will, with Governor Scott of Florida. And those are user fees. And yeah, we're talking to the tune of $70 million, including the mass market industry wide for the state of Florida. That's a lot of money out of the Florida economy. And that doesn't even count the unknowns of the testing procedures that cigars would be subjected to. So once again, I kind of want to come full circle to this discussion in the last several hours of today about the SE guidance, is that, demonstrating the adverse economic consequences of that to the administration, I can assure you, and I can assure the folks that are listening to this tonight, first thing tomorrow morning, this discussion about the SE guidance is going to be brought up, and it will be addressed by our lobbying team. There'll be a complete review done of the material and information that I've received literally up until an hour before we started this discussion tonight. But we have to attack this head on, and we have to attack it as an example of what the bureaucracy is doing to this moment, despite the litigation and the effort in Congress to mitigate the damage of the rule.
So Glynn, one more question along those lines, Bear, and then I'll turn it back to you. So with the lawsuit, right, is there a chance that, like, we end up going through Dr. Gottlieb and Secretary Price, and we make some headway? Is there a chance we go back and they say, hey, the lawsuit, we just aren't going to go through with the lawsuit? We can somehow make the headway that way, or do you think the lawsuit goes forward?
I'm just not going to comment on the litigation like that. I just can't do it.
Understood.
Glynn, we talked. Don't want to go back too far.
And by the way, real quick, I'm sorry, Will, and I don't.
No, I'm gonna ask. I gotta ask the question, and certainly, yeah. No, you're not.
I'm not being curt by saying that, because we've got a lot of very bright, very expensive lawyers working on this question, and I just think they ought to be doing the talking on the legal front in terms of the legal strategy. I will share with you that our litigation counsel is going to be coming to the trade show and be making a public presentation, as well as some other meetings and taking place, but perhaps some greater clarity, if you will, could be shared at that time, but I can't promise that.
No, and I totally understand the ramifications of a lawsuit. These are the questions that I'm kind of hearing so out in the field, so to speak, that I'm kind of asking. So
good questions.
Yeah,
good questions.
Yeah. So sort of not taking any offense.
And I think the answers will be clear sooner rather than later. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So with the presentation that the legal team is going to be making at the IPCPR trade show, can you comment on any bullet points that will be discussed at that time? Or
let's go back to Congress.
All right. Well, okay. So let's take a step back real quick here, Glynn. And something I wanted to comment on was the idea, and I don't want to take too far of a step back on this, but you had mentioned there is a possibility. Well, it's not necessarily the avenue that's right in front of us, but it is a possibility of reopening up the discussion, reopening up the option 1 versus option 2 debate.
And we are encouraging that. I can say that publicly.
Okay, so my question is this, and it follows the statement. So I recently posted a very abbreviated statement on a Facebook post Citizens for Tobacco Rights. Familiar with the organization, Glenn?
Very.
Okay, so now they post all these just kind of benign, little political posters, if you will. And one that I saw, and I don't know, I think it's because I had been posting and sharing your stuff a lot in preparation for this interview tonight, and I think that's why it ended up on my feed. And it came across, and it was a poster that said, support your right to dip. Okay, now we're not talking about dip, and I'm certainly not saying it, but overwhelming. And when I say overwhelming, I read every single comment on that particular post, and every single comment, almost 100 of them, was negative. Everything from F you and your dip to that's disgusting to et cetera, et cetera. And I posted this statement, and I said, I see a majority of the comments are opposed to the act of dipping tobacco use in general, et cetera. I believe it needs to be said that this ad is not asking anyone who doesn't want to use dip or any other tobacco. This ad is also not opposing any reasonable taxation. The deeming regulations recently enforced by the FDA could destroy a large part of the premium cigar industry. To be specific, hundreds of Americans and families living abroad depend on the premium cigar industry for their livelihood. The American tobacco farmer, as an example, is providing for their family by legal means, but is treated like a drug dealer in some circles. I understand in the past tobacco use was in the face of non-tobacco use, but this is not the world we live in anymore. In most communities, tobacco use is banned from the workplace, restaurants, bars, parks, etc. This leaves private clubs and residences the only places left where an adult can partake in tobacco use. The tobacco community, is specifically the premium cigar industry, for which I am a part of, wants to be left alone to enjoy premium cigars around others who enjoy them as well. We are simply not forcing them to be consumed by anyone who does not want to. Now, this was a point we made earlier on in this discussion, and I'm not simply flaunting my expertise on the subject or lack thereof, but what I am flaunting is the fact that there is a definitive ignorance on the subject. And to kind of return to that for a moment. So if this discussion was reopened, what are some of the strides that we can take as consumers, retailers, media members, all the way up the chain to someone like yourself, that we can make a provocative, pronounced, and influential statement to the world that we are not recruiting smokers, that we simply what is just and what is right to simply enjoy a legal product with friends and family who wish to enjoy it as well.
Bear, we're going to take everything you just said and make it a commercial, my friend.
There you go.
I mean, I swear to God. I mean, nobody put it more eloquently than you just did. You sparked this thought. There are many people in this industry that either as consumers, retailers, or manufacturers never thought this would go this far. They never thought it would go this far. And frankly, we've been preaching this message for a long time. I wrote my first piece in June or July after the president signed the Tobacco Control Act. And I said, this is where they're going to go. And it wasn't just me, but I said, listen, you've got to take this seriously. Anytime you give a federal bureaucracy the power to do something, they're going to do it. It may not be now, it may not be 5 years from now, but it's going to happen. And what you just articulated is the heart and soul of the messaging that should have taken place for the last 5 years from a much broader universe. And I'll be the first to say that. But I think now, the fear of the Almighty is now with us. Now we've seen through this 499 pages over here what this agency is capable of. And so the wake-up call is there, and it's there in the context that you just articulated on, that we're not trying to recruit smokers. We're not trying to facilitate addiction, and we're not trying to sell cigars to children. These are the fundamentals of every messaging campaign and every briefing we undertake on Capitol Hill. And it's what we say very, very publicly to anybody that'll listen. Let's go to the heart and soul, too, of what you just said in terms of spreading the word. Before the end of this broadcast, we've got to emphasize the need for grassroots mobilization. We've put 350 to 450,000, almost 500,000 messages into Congress since the beginning of this legislation. the cigar consumer public has never been asked to do anything before, ever. You know, even S-chip was amateur hour compared to what has taken place in order of trying to facilitate a movement within the cigar consumer community. Us putting out 100,000 emails at a pop is great, but it ought to be 1 million. I'll be the first to say it. But, you know, Rome wasn't created in a day, and Cigar Rights of America is not going to be created in 5 years or 6. This is something where every retailer and every email, every event, the messaging has got to be ingrained into every one of those opportunities to message to our own people, much less the general public. So what you read is the negative comments that you read, that you were referring to, is indicative of how our opposition does an amazing job of their own messaging campaigns. When you read this deeming rule, you would think there's absolutely no difference between smoking the cigar Will and you and I are smoking right now and a pack of Marlboros. Yep. If you read that rule, there's not a bit of difference between smoking cigars and smoking cigarettes, and we all know that there is nothing further from the truth. But our opposition has done a magical job of lumping all tobacco products into one giant demonized basket, and it's our task as an industry and as a cigar community to make that separation far more clear. And I hope that goes to the heart and soul of what you articulated and the concern you very, very eloquently pointed out.
I just find it very hard to believe that my fervor for the subject, as yours and Coop's, is somehow mutually exclusive to very small corner of the universe that we're occupying right now, and to everyone that's watching and to everyone that's listening at this very moment.
We're 1/2 of 1% of the whole tobacco universe. 1/2 of 1%.
And that brings about the very murky battle that we have in front of us in terms of that. But as far as the individual, even though we are 1/2 of 1%, I remember when I first signed one of the very first petitions that you put out back in 2011. It was about the possibility. It was a petition that very articulated very well about some of the deeming regulations that are now in front of us face first, including much scarier ones. And it was like, this is what they could do. This is what they could do. And it was a list that it seemed to go on and on. And it was one of the first petitions that I signed. And I printed off.
And it can get worse. And it can get worse still. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but frankly, when we get into this deeper, and people talk about the reason we have to act so quickly now is, one, you never know the exact course that the political dynamic is going to go into Washington in terms of who's in charge and what can be accomplished politically. That's a dynamic that changes every single day. The old saying, a day is a lifetime in the life of a politician. That's the reason this has to be solved this year. 2017 is a turning point in this entire debate. But let's go to where we started this. It can always get worse, just like smoking bans. They can always get worse. And when we talk about the economic harm that testing procedures can apply to small boutique cigar companies, or large ones, in fact, what it can do to the bottom line of this industry is amazing. But just wait till they want to get into manufacturing practice standards. Just wait till they want to dive into that, or they want to make advertising and marketing restrictions even more strict than banning a free sample.
Oh, yeah.
You want to get into some discussions. I mean, I don't have to be the one that plants the thought of how far this thing can go. But the reason this has to be attacked right now is because it can always get worse. And you don't know what's going to happen in 4 years from now or 8 years from now. And as some people put it in the industry, some of these folks that are coming up as the second and third generation cigar makers are a lot farther away from retirement than the leaders of those companies today. And they want those companies to be around. So this is not a 4-year debate, an 8-year debate. This is a perpetuity debate on the survival of this industry, and it's got to be attacked right here and right now.
I just want to know what we can do to kind of stir the pot at the level at which I sit. Because, again, this isn't me standing on top of, well, it is me standing on top of a soapbox, but it's not me saying, look at me, look what I've done, because I'm a nobody when it comes to
you're not. No,
But I printed off 4,000 copies of that petition that you released in 2011. I walked it around to
You're
cigar
the most
shops.
significant. You're the most significant voice right now because you're the one talking. because you are a registered voter of that member of Congress you talked about when we spoke just moments ago. You're a registered voter for that congressman. And what I want to do, Bear, is I want to email you the briefing packet, the exact briefing packet, and I'll do it tomorrow morning, is email you an exact copy of the briefing packet we use in that congressman's office in Washington, D.C. And I want you to hand deliver it to that member's district office, which is probably no farther than 15 miles from where you're sitting right now. And I want you to hand deliver it to his office and say, why isn't he on this bill? And I'm a cigar voter, and I'm taking it seriously, and I'm getting my friends to take it seriously. And it's important to my livelihood as an employee of that cigar shop, whose boss, is, by the way, has been a great champion of ours and the whole industry when he comes to Washington on behalf of the Texas
Absolutely.
retailers, is you need to walk that physically into that office and say, you know what? I'm going to make sure that 500 of my closest personal cigar smoking friends also deliver that exact same message to that member of Congress within the next 30 days. That's the type of proactive type of grassroots approach we need with every member of Congress throughout the entire country.
Oh, believe me, Congressman Arshon, as soon as I saw that he was not on this bill, he was getting a phone call from me tomorrow when I saw that earlier in this evening. I've had a number of discussions, informal discussions with the congressman and with his aides as well on a number of political subjects, including this one in fact. So,
and then I want you to drive to Senator Cornyn's office and do the exact same thing.
I don't know if they'll let me in the building, but sure. Yeah.
Nah, they'll let you. They'll let you.
You're Bear.
They'll let you.
You're on the primetime show. You can go in there.
I'm sure they'll take those media credentials seriously.
Oh, that's good. You know, Glynn, a lot of times, and you brought up a few points, and Bear did too. You know, I know people get frustrated sometimes by the petition process, right? I think it's important, though, maybe you can articulate why do we have the petition? Why do we have to keep going back to the petition process, and why is it important for people to be involved with that? Well,
the petitions are just one piece of the puzzle, and I hear it and listen to it, and then I sit there and say, people need to wake up and look at how every other special interest group in the country operates as well. Mm-hmm. I'll bet I get 5 a day requests for me to fill out a petition from the United States Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the most powerful, effective special interest groups in the United States. I bet I get 5 requests a day on different pieces of tax legislation, the healthcare legislation, trade legislation, 5 a day from just the U.S. Chamber. Same thing from the National Federation of Independent Business. Same thing from the National Rifle Association. House members take those types of positions, those petitions seriously because they're checking the yays and the nays. I've got a piece of paper in front of me. I've been in those offices where they're on issues that they're getting a great deal of number of calls on. They've set up a spreadsheet, and it's about the yays and the nays. I was in Senator Manchin's office where, you know, it was about confirmation of a different member of the cabinet. And the senator's office was getting flooded with phone calls from the education community on this particular day. Yays and nays, yays and nays. And they allow that given member to keep a pulse on what they're doing, what's going on in their respective districts or states. I can't emphasize that enough. People can't dismiss that. They should send emails. They should send personal letters. They should make sure they call. And I want to clarify one other thing about the petition. You know, on our system, you know, it's the best $18,000 we spend a year is that system, and it's a proprietary system. And all you have to do is put in your name and your zip code. When you put in your zip code, the rest takes care of itself. It goes to your specific member of Congress because of your zip code. So there's no second and third step in the process. Put in your name and zip code, and that member of Congress then knows it's from his or her district. You can't dismiss that. There are different ways to communicate, and you brought up, Bear, you brought up the Citizens for Tobacco Rights. They're playing the exact same game, and they're bragging about having 125,000 subscribers. We're doing infinitely better than that, and our messages are getting through, and that's one of the reasons we've even got 118 members of the House and 16 members of the Senate, or over the life of this legislation, 289 members of the House and 26 members of the Senate on a quote-unquote tobacco bill, much less a cigar bill over the course of the last 4 sessions of Congress. People can't dismiss that. We have to communicate as a cigar community to these elected officials, and it's one of the few mechanisms that we've got. And just because the cigar industry is new to this type of political process, all I can say is get used to it and be a part of the process. And I know people fill it out maybe 2 and 3 times. I get it. But redundancy is a good thing in the political process. And these members, we've gone through 2 election cycles with the House. People have to know that that the cigar community is a bona fide political constituency. And it's one of the mechanisms we've got to do it. Another one's fly-ins. People coming into Washington, especially the manufacturers and retailers, have been doing an amazing job of that over the course of the last 5 years. And there's going to be a lot more of that over the course of the next 6 months. But we've taken consumers around. I've got a cigar club in New York City. We've said we're going to put them all on a train and bring them to Washington for a day to work their respective members of Congress from New York City. It's the right thing to do. But you can organize things like that in your own shops. You can organize collective cigar clubs, voicing themselves through joint letters to their members of Congress. It's not going to be ignored. They may not agree with us, but they're not going to ignore it.
Glynn, the Congress, congressional efforts. Obviously, we talked a lot about the bills, right? And obviously, those bills they serve multiple purposes, right? Obviously, we'd love to get them onto the floor and get them voted on, but they're clearly serving another purpose there. Now we have the appropriations piece, which is an angle we've worked on. Now, this is one I've kind of looked at, and I say, man, every time we go down the appropriations route, we're lumped in with something else, and we end up. Is that just the reality of working with the legislative process in this country?
No, it's the reality of a tobacco bill.
Okay.
I mean, it was April of last year that the language got through the House Appropriations Committee, the full House Appropriations Committee. Think about how long the cigar industry has been around, and think about how long the cigar industry has been playing, premium cigar industry has been playing tangible politics like this.
Right.
And there's been language now in 3 different sessions of Congress, but last year was the first time language successfully got through the full committee that would have prohibited the FDA from spending $1 to implement this rule. That's a major accomplishment for the industry, not for CRA, not for IPCPR, but for the collective effort of this industry to play the political game. And I think there will be good news on that front in the not too distant future. And getting language coupled with that out of the Senate is an uphill battle. We've been very candid about that from the very beginning. We've got some great champions on both sides of the aisle in the Senate that'll be working on that. If there's an omnibus budget package going into the end of this calendar year, which we hope there will be. But our points have always come down to last minute negotiations. We had serious roadblocks with big tobacco last year when Congress did an omnibus package going into the package that was adopted in December of 2016. But the exact same effort's going to take place this year. We have to be consistent with it. We can't be afraid to stay at the ball game. And as I just put it in an email this morning, the proverbial phrase in Washington is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the beautiful thing now about IPCPR and CRA and CA all collectively being in Washington, D.C. together now is that there's a standing presence for this industry as absolutely never before.
Well said.
Win, lose, or draw.
As far as FDA goes, Glynn, Bear, do you have anything else? Because there were a few other things I want to hit Glynn with.
No. I don't
Okay, no, Glynn. We tackled a lot, and it was amazing. I kind of look back at it. There was just so many moving parts with that, and as we were going through that, it was amazing. That
and hell, we haven't even talked about the locals and states yet.
That's what we were just gonna hit. We were just gonna hit a few. We have
no kidding, really. All right.
Yeah, yes, we did. So let me start off with one, and I know Bear's got a couple of. So California, the mess that's going on in California.
That's not a state or a locality. That's a country.
So is that like? Are we? Yeah. Boy, I'm hearing of manufacturers shipping product because there's a big tax that's for folks that don't. There's a huge tax going into effect this weekend there. Are our efforts there stalled? Is there anything we can do there? I
had 2 conference calls about that subject yesterday, and let's clarify where this thing came from. The first time since CRA came into being, this same question went to a referendum, and it barely died. Matter of fact, there were threats of a recount because of precincts in Los Angeles County. That was 3-4 years ago, I guess. Then this referendum process went through to raise the cigarette tax, and as everybody knows, the tax on cigars is married to the methodology on taxation of cigarettes, and it goes up to 65%. And that passed 60-40. That means if every cigar smoker in the state of California voted against it, it still would have passed. And the cigarette industry spent about $80 million to try to kill it, and actually threatened the governor's office. And that's a public story about what Big Tobacco did with the governor's office to try to prevent this from going to a referendum, and they failed. So when Philip Morris and Reynolds can't stop something of that magnitude, that gives you an idea as to how big it was.
Wow.
That being said, there's been some recent legislation passed that is going to alter the administration of tobacco taxation in the state of California, realigning everything between the Department of Tax and the Board of Equalization. There needs to be a serious concerted effort to separate taxation in the state of California. It's ridiculous that the tax on premium handmade cigars is married to the tax level on cigarettes. We've had a lot of discussion with the retail community out there, and we are committed to getting to California to facilitate some meetings and discussions at the legislative level soon after the trade show to see what can be done. And there's some different parts in the works that I really don't want to chat about publicly as well that hopefully can work towards some form of relief for the retailers in California.
Well, that's encouraging, because I didn't know if it was just like a battleground we were going to move. There's so many fronts you guys fight on. I didn't know if that was a battleground. I was hoping that you weren't going to say it was a lost cause. So that's good news.
You can't take that attitude about any of this stuff.
Right.
You've got to say everywhere is the battleground. There's only so many resources and time and money. Like I said, you got Big Tobacco that spent tens of millions of dollars to try to defeat that proposition. They pulled together huge coalitions of business groups to try to defeat it. Were unsuccessful. It's just the way of the world in California.
Yeah, I mean,
but there has to be an approach, a consistent approach to try to mitigate the damage of it, and I think all the organizations are committed to having that dialogue out there.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the margin that passed by, considering
it was, it wasn't recount material. Let's put it that way.
No, I was like, I mean, there's got to be more smokers than that, or did they not really? So I just was like.
Well, it's the danger of anything that's thrown to a referendum, and referendums are horrible on smoking bans or taxes. Anything to do with tobacco, referendums are a dangerous proposition, and it just speaks to the gutlessness of legislatures that aren't willing to make those decisions themselves.
Exactly.
We talked about lumping because any tobacco legislation, unfortunately, has to kind of, because it's a tobacco piece of legislation or tobacco law, it has to get lumped in, like the language that was in the appropriations bill, for example, and everything like that. Are you, Glenn? Are you familiar with the bill that that just went into law, HF 295 in Iowa, that just recently passed and was signed by Governor Reynolds there?
Refresh my memory. Which one was that?
So this is the piece of legislation that basically prohibits any municipality within the state
the
of
personal
Iowa.
property deal.
Yes.
Yeah, the personal property deal. Yeah.
This was lumped in, that part of the pro tobacco, if you will, that part of the pro tobacco piece of that legislation was lumped in a lot with had to do with some taxation and property laws and some other stuff as well, and it was kind of piggybacked on a larger item for discussion, and it was actually passed with a mass majority and signed into law by Governor Reynolds. Is this a strategy that we can come to expect from our industry as far as trying to piggyback off of into some larger bills, perhaps?
It's a respectable strategy. I mean, anytime we can marry our issue to especially property rights types of issues, I think is a positive trend.
How do we as an industry, or what's the official position on a lot of these age increases that we're seeing creeping up, particularly on the East Coast, but it's going widespread now.
Well, the
Recently, there
age
was a case in Arkansas.
the age issue legislation is a real quandary. Frankly, because there's so much time and resources to go around, we have traditionally allowed and rely upon the IPCPR and the CAA to fight those types of battles. We've also been making the point that the 21 and above is truly the demographic of the premium handmade cigar community. It's a battle against the nanny state on that type of question. Do we think that 18 to 21-year-olds ought to be able to enjoy a cigar, especially those that are in foxholes in foreign lands? Absolutely. And it's absolutely ridiculous that government has latched onto this as another nanny state type of measure. And it's indicative of what the healthcare community has been promoting across the country. But those types of bills have also been dying in certain parts of the country. I think it was Vermont that I didn't think you wouldn't think something like that would have a problem in Vermont, but I think they killed it. I'm trying to think. Colorado, I think, killed it.
Washington killed it too. State.
So
well, they like to enjoy smoking something other than premium cigars in those states.
You've got to gauge the political dynamic based upon the local political environment. But the IPCPR and the CAA have been diligent of having their on-the-ground lobbyists on that type of legislation, and you're going to see more of it. And let's keep in mind, when the FDA put out this final rule, their new definition of youth is 27. I mean,
yep.
Every time the smoking trend goes down with that 12 to 17 bracket, the 18 to 21 bracket, they say, oh, let's move the goalposts again. Youth is now 27, which is absolutely ridiculous. And they commission studies on what that means in terms of reducing smoking rates and the like. But it's just a nanny state measure by the body parts lobby.
Isn't with the kind of, I won't say lackadaisical, but I will use the word passive approach to these types of legislation, isn't that concerning? Because you mentioned the fact that we are less than 0.5%, and if we're losing 18 to 21-year-olds because of these laws, isn't that concerning or alarming in some aspect or some front at least?
That's a deep question. I don't think. I mean, I'm just talking probably the raw business side here, and I'm thinking out loud right now with you. The average American cigar smoker is over the age of 40. I mean, when you put it into context of who's buying premium handmade cigars, I don't have any raw numbers to substantiate this, but the 18 to 21 bracket's probably a fraction of the entire cigar smoking pool of this country.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind it's definitely the smallest, but numbers are numbers, and when you're dealing with less than 1%.
And it's a big deal in college towns too. I do know that, and I'm sympathetic to that. It's a big deal in college towns. Real quick, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, and I get what you're saying. I guess the one thing I look at is, hey, if we could build some support with a demographic, that 18 to 21 demographic, they're eventually going to become those 40-year-old people someday.
Yeah.
So you don't want to. So I kind of, if we invested in that, maybe, I don't know. I'm just kind of looking. We want to eventually have those 40-year-old who kind of think, like we do. Is kind of where I'm going with.
I think that's a great discussion for the three of us to have in Vegas.
Okay.
Real quick before we go on, I know we talked about California, but I want to highlight a couple of other spots where there's some battlegrounds growing.
Absolutely.
One, I think we're the only ones that have gone on record siding with the Louisiana Gaming Commission on opposing the smoking ban on casinos in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We have an active petition on our website, on the Louisiana page, and in our legislative section that goes to every member of the Baton Rouge City Council opposing that smoking ban. The smoking ban in New Orleans has cost Harrah's $70 million. It ought to be a clear economic question for Baton Rouge. They've marshaled their forces very well as city council, from what I understand, if you're just counting votes. And we've gone on record as opposing that smoking ban expansion in Baton Rouge. And the other one is Mayor de Blasio's proposed cigar and tobacco tax increases in New York City. I had a conference call yesterday about that. We're going to be issuing a piece that all of the retailers of New York City can distribute to their consumers to voice their opposition to that. And our petition, again, will be linked to every single member of New York City Council. Also, there's a proposed tax increase in Massachusetts and a tax cap piece of legislation in Massachusetts. We sent Cody Carden on our staff last Tuesday up to Boston to give testimony with the retailers in favor of a tax cap in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, proposed tax increase in the state of Delaware that's on our page. So if you go to our Legislative Action Center, all these that are still active this late in the state legislative season, including those in Baton Rouge and New York City, are all active on there. So I just want to bring those to your listeners' attention.
Boy, New York, Glynn, it's been an enigma for me because there's been some good mobilization, going back to the NYTA and all. I just feel like, man, every time they try, they kind of just get slapped down. It's not like they do try up there.
And let's call it the ghost of Bloomberg.
Yeah. Well, Now, why you mentioned Baton Rouge? Why is that a very significant battle in terms of the whole thing?
Well, I'll tell you, and CRA is we've been adamant about Iowa. You brought up Iowa on another bill, but Iowa and Kansas, Missouri come to mind as to places that there's been legislation to ban smoking in gaming facilities. And we've always been public in our opposition to those. There's clear economic research on the relationship between economic impact of smoking bans and gaming. Those studies have been published by all entities, the Federal Reserve Bank. It's a known fact that if you have a smoking ban and gaming, you're going to collect a lot less money. There's a study that was done that documented that the Illinois casinos have received $1 billion less than the Indiana casinos because you can smoke in Indiana gaming facilities and you can't in Illinois. That debate's gone on in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, in Maryland. I just think it's because maybe casinos are one of the last bastions of freedom, just like cigar shops, as to places you can enjoy a cigar. And so it's important to go on record on those types of proposals.
No, I agree. I'll do my unscientific study. I went into Harrah's. My first RPTBR was 2010, New Orleans. I went into Harrah's, pretty crowded. I went in like mid one of the evenings of the during the show, and I went in kind of around the same. I think it was like day 3, and that casino was dead when our trade show was in there.
They lost tons.
This was you don't need a scientific study to see.
No, you don't need an economist on that one. They lost a lot of money that week.
Yeah. And I heard all the things about New Orleans. I'll tell you something, Glynn. I got into cabs. I was talking to workers there, and I'll never forget the cab driver. He said, "I'm really sorry what our city's doing to you because we want you guys here."
Yeah. They get it.
Yeah. He asked us. We were at the cigar convention. We're talking to him. We gave him a couple of cigars in addition to his tip at the end. It was just, it was. I could tell you, it wasn't the people there who didn't make us feel welcome. I'll say that.
And I want to make sure there's something else said before I don't know how much longer we've got, and I'll go as long as you want to.
Okay.
But I want to make sure there's something else said on this broadcast that needs to be said.
Okay.
And that is anybody that's a brand owner or a boutique manufacturer or a manufacturer that's not a quote unquote corporate sponsor of CRA, if you've got a concern, if you've got a compliance question, if you've got any type of concern about whether it's the SE process, any of the existing guidance documents, we've got staff and we've got lawyers, and that's what they're there for. This is an industry fight. This is about something bigger than ourselves. And no one's asking for checks around here to answer questions and to try to be as helpful as they can. So if any of your listeners are these brand owners or manufacturers that are not corporate sponsors of CRA, and we list who they are, and we're grateful and thankful for them. But anybody that has a concern or a question that's listening can call our offices in Washington, and you can put the number up sometime, or just email us at info@cigarrights.org. We will do our best to answer your question. And this is about a community. And this is about all of us being in this fight together. So I don't even want anybody to be frightened off by that. And anybody that said differently is wrong. And we're not going to turn anybody away because they haven't cut a check. So this is too important of a moment in the history of this industry for all of us to get parochial. I hope that comes screaming through.
That's good. That's really, really good to hear. And I know, Glynn,
Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. I know, Glynn, anytime I've pinged you, and I've pinged you at some odd hours, you've always gotten back to me. So that is very appreciative.
What comes to mind is I love them to death. My God, I feel like they're family. Yvonne and Yvette Rodriguez down in Miami. And they've got a wonderful little boutique cigar company, and they're making them at an unknown location in Nicaragua, and they're selling to just shops in greater Miami. I think they've gotten some accounts outside of the state here and there, and they get a lot of, they're masters of social media, and they're just so genuine and so passionate about this industry, Yvonne and Yvette Rodriguez. And we brought them to Washington because they were so good at articulating what this industry meant to them. And there you had, and this is their term, Afro-Cuban twin sisters who are just doing this. I'm not going to say for their living. I don't know what, God love them. Let them chime in on this themselves, because you ought to put them on the air sometime. But they are so passionate and so articulate about what this industry means to them historically with their family, and their grandmother that smoked cigars, and their Cuban heritage, and the like. And they epitomize the passion of this industry. We brought them to Washington with Sean Williams. And this was before Sean's new gig, and with El Primer Mundo. And we brought Sean and Yvonne and Yvette to Washington, and we did a day and a half of rounds with members of Congress from Florida and Georgia. And they got the message. They just articulated it in a way that only people that are so passionate about this industry can do. And you know what? We didn't ask them for $1, not $1. It was the right thing to do for this industry. It was the right thing to do politically. They did an amazing job of telling the story. And you know what? They got members of Congress on our side that we may not have gotten otherwise. And I use Sean and Yvonne and Yvette as examples of companies that, we're not getting anything from, but they've got a message to tell. We've brought in women-owned cigar shops to get across the message of what the impact of this rule is on women and minority-owned enterprises. We didn't ask for $1 for that, but it was the right thing to do. And so no one should be afraid to pick up the phone or to send us an email, because that's what we're here for. Now, do we hope that everybody helps chime in a little bit to help pay some serious legal fees? Absolutely. And serious lobbying expenses and the like? Absolutely. But this is about a community. And I just hope that message comes screaming through on this thing.
Oh, but we appreciate that. Definitely
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Glad to go back to the local government side. Are you familiar with in Texas House Bill 1279? It's proposed by Representative Matt Shaheen.
No.
Okay. So it's been sent to the floor. It hasn't garnered much much in the terms of motivation or anything like that, or momentum rather. But House Bill 1279 was proposed by Representative Shaheen to basically eradicate and also prohibit any future law to go into effect for any municipality, any community that would in fact prohibit cigar shops from existing. You talked about the gaming industry being one of the last safe havens for cigar smokers, and other than the retailing side and the retail locations. Now retailers are experiencing quite the threat with smoking bans and everything, as we've discussed and articulated, and as we can see on a day-to-day basis. Kind of putting you on the spot here, but can Representative Shaheen expect any support from our industry that would get a simple yet clear and concise and very powerful piece of legislation through the House of Representatives in Texas, and perhaps influence other states as well to pass similar legislation?
Give me the background premise again on what it accomplishes.
It's a very simple law that basically says that says that any
So preemption. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it eliminates any future law from taking place, or for
At the
existing
at
the local level, at the local level, or any law that's in existence currently that would basically shut down any cigar shops.
Gotcha.
So if you make 51% of your profit or more from premium cigars, you would be exempt, grandfathered in, whatever you want to call it, and you can exist, function, allow smoking in your facility, and continue.
And no
to
local
sell
governments could screw with you.
And no local governments, no state government in the state of Texas could do it. No law could be put into effect.
Well, it sounds like what we have in Virginia called the Dillon Rule, where local governments are not allowed to have any type of ordinance or regulation that's stronger than that of the state. And if it's along those lines, then I think we could definitively want to support that. I promise you I'll review the bill in the morning and see if we can put our heads together, and I'll make a phone call over to IPCPR too about it. I'll see if it's on anybody's radar screen to date. I apologize for not being familiar with it right now.
House Bill 1279, just so you
I've
know.
already written it down.
Fantastic.
And look into it. There have been some preemption, and that's a preemption bill. There have been some similar types of preemption legislation introduced and considered in, I believe, Arizona at one time. But it's a solid way for states to try to preempt what a locality might try to do. I know something like that's been discussed probably in Missouri too, if memory serves. So let's look into it together in the morning.
Fantastic.
I have one more state one, and this one kind of came up mid-year. Pennsylvania, the smoking ban in Pennsylvania. It's not
dead. It's not dead.
No. Do we know where that stands right now?
Well, I mean, the conventional wisdom says it's not going anywhere, but that's not a reason not to do anything.
Right.
And we've got an active petition on that. We've got people on the ground, obviously, with the foothold that the premium cigar industry has in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I think we need to take it seriously because you never know when the political dynamic in that state's going to change. You've got, you've consistently had a string of governors in Pennsylvania that have been in favor of imposing the OTP tax, and with them in Florida being two bastions on the OTP front. You never know when that political dynamic is going to change, and you never know when the political will is going to alter on the smoking ban question. And you've got amazing cigar bars and lounges in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They need to be protected, and to help prevent something of that nature happening in the future, we have to let our voices be heard right now. So whereas right now the conventional wisdom says it's not going anywhere, we got to take it seriously as long as it's alive. And by the way, the same bill is alive in Indiana. And we have an active petition on that so that the cigar community in Indiana can let their voices be heard. But there's a bill there that would close the exemptions in that state as well.
Very good. Very good.
A lot of moving parts, boys and girls.
Absolutely. All right. So I think we're getting to the end, Glynn. I'm going to ask you. We'll have a fun question here. I'll throw a fun question. What is? So I kind of was watching you during the show, drinking from that Redskins cup. And I don't know. Hopefully this won't cause an issue with Bear. But what are your predictions for the Redskins this year?
We're screwed again. The Redskins keep us humble.
So the division's tight this year. I think.
I think we'll do well in the NFC East. I still think we'll do well against the Giants and the Cowboys and the Eagles. What happens beyond that, and just remember with the Redskins, preseason counts, and so we'll be playing. we'll be playing Green Bay in the preseason, and from what I was reading, one recent story, I hope they do come to an agreement on having a quarterback. I think Cousins has got his deal for this year, but I think the bets are off on a long-term relationship. And obviously, there's been a lot of front office types of shakeups. I think we've got a good defensive line, and the confidence level seems to be rising with the offense. But I think we'll do well in the NFC East, and when we do well in that, I call it a year if we beat the Cowboys. No offense, Bear. Who loves you?
Hey, no, actually, Coop's not aware of this. I am not a Cowboys fan.
Really? I didn't know that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I am a Packers fan. So,
Wow.
Glenn, you're going down in the preseason. I got to tell you that. But my question, in your opinion, you mentioned a little bit. I wanted to know: is Kirk Cousins the Washington Redskins quarterback in 2018?
Today I say I doubt it.
Really?
Who do you think he goes
but
to?
That's going to be totally predicated on what happens in 17. I mean, his value. I read a piece in the last 24 hours where he might have an overstated opinion of his value, but if he has a strong season, you're only as good as what surrounds you, and I think it's been part of the problem. That was part of the problem from.
Well, he's got one of my fellow TCU alumni
the
to
last
coach
20
Josh
quarterbacks.
Dobson, so.
The last 20 quarterbacks we've had a problem with what's around them versus them themselves. Even RG could have been more successful if he were surrounded by better talent. But I think things are evolving in that regard for Cousins. And, I've been a fan since I was knee high to a grasshopper. And, at least I'm not in Detroit. But
now Jay Gruden seems like he's done a good job there. I mean, what's the feeling in the city on Jay Gruden? Does Mr. Snyder, you think he going to keep
I think Bruce Allen and I know Bruce caught a lot of flack. And for the purposes of disclosure, my daughter had an outstanding internship with the Washington Redskins.
Okay.
But I think Bruce Allen's got a vision for things. I know he's caught a lot of flack here in the off season.
Yep.
But I think if he and Gruden get their heads together, if we have a somewhat of a winning season, we usually, I hate to downplay our expectations, but we have to be in these situations.
Yeah.
I think the more important question here, Coop, is Glenn ever attended a Redskins game with like a pig's nose or war paint or
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no.
Just how them go. He's saying he high to aggressive. I just wanted to know how much fervor was behind that fandom for Redskins.
Oh boy, we take it to great lengths, but as we put it, sometimes I feel like we're just there for great tailgate.
Yeah, I see you out at the Sunday tailgates. Now they're moving the state. There's a new stadium that's going to be built there.
They're going to build one somewhere.
Didn't they just open this one?
No, it's outdated. I mean,
really? I remember when you guys were in RFK. I feel like I'm getting old now.
I mean, I hope Virginia gets it, and there's a site probably in Loudoun County somewhere near Redskins Park. But the district will be in play, but the district's going to have to promise not to come after their name. And the governor of Maryland, just like our governor in Virginia, have been aggressive at courting them. And, it's another one of those proverbial billion-dollar questions for somebody.
Wow.
It's probably going to end up on some piece of swampland like the stadium in San Francisco.
Boy, this is a heck of a lot more fun talking about than the FDA.
Well, I wanted to end this on a positive note, actually. I mean, we just
now let the record show that not many times can you use the term positive note and Redskins in the same sentence.
now I'm a Giants fan.
Oh gosh! Oh my goodness!
And listen, right now they when they got rid of Coughlin, they took the heart out of me because I love that man. And the
2 Super Bowls. How could you not?
No, and one of the sponsors, the Cigar Shop, was one of our sponsors. They just beat up me all the time about my love affair with Tom Coughlin. But I'm like, I love the man.
But to go back to your first question, if Cousins has a successful season, that price tag gets pretty expensive in 18 and beyond.
Yeah, but now Mr. Snyder is known to cut a check, though. I mean, do you think it's a money issue that it would be, or a cap issue?
Not anymore. I think it was a question, and would have been a question if the Redskins were still under that NFL sanction, if you will, on the salary cap. But I don't think that's the case now, and I think he's going to get 24 to 27 million for this season, and price is going to go up to 30 and up if he has a successful season.
Do you think it's has something to do with the cautious optimism around Kirk Cousins? Has something to do with the fact that they got burned on RG3 so bad?
Oh God, that's always the question. I mean, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I think that those types of things always haunt you in the back of your mind.
Cousins doesn't have the injury history of RG3, though. You'd think that, I mean, if, again, I'm not an NFL executive, but, I got to look at that kind of thing before I pony up some money and write that check. And
I just wish Kurt had the some of RG's guts to run the ball a little bit more aggressively himself, but we'll see what happens.
Got to have the legs to do it, though, Glenn.
Absolutely, got to do it. Yeah,
boy, this is more exciting than the FDA.
Yep.
No, it's not. It's not more exciting, but it's a lot more fun. But it's the old saying in Washington: the two toughest jobs, being president and quarterback for the Washington Redskins.
Oh boy, yeah, I agree. I agree. So, well, Glynn, thank you so much again for. I mean, we went a little over and we said, but I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go through this deep dive, and I look forward to seeing you next week and a half. I guess can't believe it's coming around the corner.
I know. And real quick, I got to say this. I want to thank Marvin Shankin and Cigar Aficionado for launching their grassroots campaign real recently. I hope people will go to the cigaraficionado.com and I hope that petition can be replicated in other websites and the like. We've got ours that goes to members of Congress. Their appeal is directly to the administration. So I do want to bring that to folks' attention.
Glynn, as long as I'll ask one question on that. Was that something that was spearheaded by Aficionado, or was that something that we kind of went to Aficionado and say, hey, can you guys do this?
Yeah, they initiated that. They
Fantastic.
initiated that. We had a productive meeting in New York recently with their staff and the like, and great supporters of the cause, just like so many media outlets are. And we provided some supporting research and the like, but when you saw it, I saw it at the same time. So we thank them for that, and hope people that use it and go to it and send the letters that have been set up for you. It's a prepackaged letter, just like ours is to Congress. We need to attack this from all fronts, and I hope every media outlet launches their own as well. But I think Mr. Shankin and the magazine for taking that initiative, and IPCPR's got an active petition on their website. We've got ours to Congress on ours. Ours just goes to the House and Senate. So it's good that Aficionado is taking theirs to the administration. Collectively, we hit it from all sides, and I think it's good for the industry.
Awesome.
Hey, Coop, before we close it up, I would like to say one last fun thing, if you don't mind.
No, sure.
I want to wish a belated happy birthday to one of my fellow colleagues at Michael's Tobacco Viewless, Kim Jackson. Her birthday was yesterday. Kim Jackson works really hard for Michael's Tobacco Viewless, and she also has a booming art practice. She was recently the featured cover artist on Cigar Press magazine. You can't tell from this picture, but cool. She makes art from cigar labels. Famous images like Andy Warhol here. She's done a famous Hitchcock piece as well. She's a beautifully talented individual. I want to wish her a belated happy birthday. And if you want to check out some of her amazing pieces, kjackart.com.
And I think that highlights how cigars in all forms are an art form.
Yes.
You missed what just happened on my end. The studio door just opened. Sorry about that.
Ghost of Christmas Past?
Yeah, exactly. Someone forgot that I was broadcasting, and the car almost came in. So hopefully it is. Car would have just went right into the studio. The Sereno Cigar Company studio. They would have not been happy, but no. So sorry about that. Anyway, but the great job on that. That was a beautiful cover, actually. All right, so that wraps up special edition number 5. We have this Thursday on the Primetime Show. We have the Cabaraqueño guys from with Protocol Cigars. You want to talk about a small company that's kind of gained some momentum? That's always a fun show with them. So Aaron and I will have them on. So be sure to tune in.
And they're incorporated in New Jersey, and they've been helping us. And all the brand owners, there's several located in New Jersey, need to be helping us on getting Senator Booker on board. So
we'll make sure we mention it to Juan and Bill. Absolutely.
Great guys.
Absolutely. So, yep. So be sure to tune into Primetime Show on Thursday night, 10 p.m. Eastern. Glynn, thank you very much.
Thank you. A great 2 hours, isn't it?
Yeah, great. We went real fast, but appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
See you next time.